Friends and colleagues, this is Jim Rice. I'm the Managing Director for Governance and Leadership within Integrated. It's my pleasure to help you explore some of the changing landscape of good governance. This is the fourth in a series of 4 webinars that are looking at exchanging ideas with knowledgeable advisors and board leaders from across the U.S. We have a number of folks that are registered with us. This will be a 45-minute webinar. It'll be relaxed, and we would encourage everyone that is participating to pose questions by typing them into the question and answer or the chat box that you'll see on the right side of your screen. I begin this program by acknowledging in earlier sessions we've had the opportunity to explore everything from relationships of the board with their chief executives, with their physicians, and some of the changing landscape. And today we're going to probe more fully and carefully into how boards are starting to use new technologies to leverage information that they need for better decision making. In this first slide that we'll be looking at, how this information get broken into more understandable and usable pieces. How can technology be useful? And in fact, how can this be used not only for decision making but better board development as well? In this webinar, we have 3 individuals that are going to share some of their insights and experiences from a rich vast exposure to working with boards of all sizes and shapes across the United States. You'll see from left to right on your screen, Dottie is going to offer some additional comments in just a moment about her background. She'll be one of our early presenters in our webinar. Bill will also share some of his background, as will Kelly. I want to start briefly with Kelly to introduce herself. She's working within our firm, within our physician services as well as our governance practices. Kelly, why don't you say hello to the participants, give a few words about your background, and then we'll go to Bill and Dottie.
Great, Jim, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As Jim mentioned, I work in both our physician services as well as our governance practices. And physician services focus on the development of compensation programs for providers, healthcare providers, both physicians and advanced practice providers, as well as fair market valuations. And really, we're seeing in our work with clients across the country that commission and board work are beginning to cross more and more. Boards are becoming more and more interested in harnessing technology for better decision making, not only in the board that they do related to the oversight of the enterprise, but also more specific in the areas of physician and executive compensation and other compliance issues related to regulatory oversight. So I'm really interested and eager to hear what the other participants have to say about harnessing technology and specific to those compliance and regulatory topics.
Thank you. Bill, thank you for joining us. We work together. I know that you work in a number of industries, but you have a particular interest in the healthcare arena as well. Just give us a couple of sentences about your background as well and your interest in board in effectiveness.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. It's great to be here with everyone. I really my 30-year career in kind of all things governance, risk management, ethics. My last corporate position, I was the Chief Risk and Chief Ethics Officer for at the time, Fortune 20 health insurance company. And now I've been spending the last 9 years in an advisory and consulting capacity, helping boards, helping C-suite executives kind of navigate all the changes that I'm sure we'll talk a lot about today, especially in areas of board operation, risk management, and compliance.
Thank you, Bill. And finally, our third panelist today is Dottie. Can you go through some of your background? It's a pleasure to have you with us and explore some of these new technology tools in just a few moments.
Sir, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dottie Schindlinger. I was a founding team member of Board Effect, and before that, I had spent about the previous 10 years in consulting to boards and doing a number of different kinds of training programs for boards. So, really, just kind of an all-around governance geek. At the end of last year, Board Effect was acquired by the largest company in the secure board software space called Diligence, and so now I'm here with Diligent Corporation, but my role is still to serve as our governance technology evangelist, which is, I think, a fun title. It is actually what it says on my business card. And in that role, what I do is spend time giving presentations at conferences, particularly to boards of directors, but also C-suite executives and others that are interested in how to align best practices for boards with technology tools that can help them to do it efficiently and well. So that's sort of the lens through which I see the world and do research and write things and present. But I am really quite interested in everything having to do with good governance for lots of different kinds of boards.
I love teasing you about the governance technology evangelist. It's a very apt title. As our participants in this webinar will see, you're enthusiastic about information that can help boards make better decisions and be more effective and feel more confident in their roles going forward. Thank you all for joining us. I want to ask one big question to get started. That is, as we look at the journey that many hospitals and health systems are going through, it doesn't make any difference whether they're smaller critical hospitals or larger health systems or academic medical centers, are facing some significant challenges. The journey into population health management, the fears of cases that are going to be based on value rather than volume. I'm going to first turn to Kelly here and get some of her perspectives as you've been working with your clients in a number of different kinds of markets. What are you seeing to be some of the challenges or the pressures, the factors that are driving boards and their executive teams to pay more attention to not just the process of decision-making that they're doing, plan budgeting, looking at risk, but how they trying to harness some new technologies as well? What are the things driving the pressure for better decision-making and better information from your perspective?
Well, I think the big message is that board work is becoming more and more difficult. Issues are complex, expensive investments in technology and patient care resources put on the board from a fiscal responsibility standpoint, and the risks are becoming greater. There's increased regulatory oversight, as I mentioned before, and actually Jim published last year a great white paper called Risks in the Boardroom. It talks about 13 specific risks in an era of accountable care that's available if you would like more detail. But from a high level, you know, the Yates memo put a great deal of pressure on the board as it identified, you know, not only could organizations be held responsible for some compliance and regulatory challenges, but individual executive board members and physicians can also be held personally responsible, and we've seen some of that come out in recent settlements. So boards are yearning for more information, better information, easier ways to become informed and feel like they have the information they need to make sound decisions on behalf of the organization. They're governing across a continuum of care, and simply a monthly board report isn't necessarily going to be what they're looking for anymore. They want something more dynamic to help them handle their current challenges and overcome them and make good decisions for their organizations. So we're hearing and getting a lot of questions about dashboards and portals, and other ways to get more timely access to information in order to remain informed and fulfill their duties as good board members.
Thank you, Kelly. You emphasized the idea of access to better information, dynamic information, can think of no better resource to help us explore some of that landscape than Bill and Dottie. Bill, let's first turn to you. My question again was, hospitals and health systems are going to use a new landscape, this more complex area. What are you seeing some of the factors and drivers to make the boards and executive teams need more information, and as Kelly talks about it, more dynamic information?
Absolutely. I would agree 100% with Kelly about, the governance evolving. It's becoming more and more difficult to fulfill those duties well and efficiently. I guess as I really think about it, there's a growing need around, I would say, to manage and master greater complexity without needing more time. And that's really, I don't think any of us would argue that we are not dealing with exponentially more complexity as we move forward. But most directors I talk to, and most people that operate around the boardroom, spending significantly more time is not an option. It's how do I spend that time better, and how do I get better information? So it's really around the speed and change of decision making. Bigger decisions have to be made that actually hold higher risk in time than ever before. Volume of information, and in one case, in one hand, portals and dashboards can be great, but in cases it's a license to throw more information at directors, and there's a little bit of pushback to say, no, I don't want necessarily more information, I want better and more efficient information. There's a much higher bar for both board capabilities and performance, especially around risk and risk management. And most of my career in that space, as was mentioned, around the regulatory oversight. Regulators are asking harder questions. They're demanding more of an integrated view. They're demanding more connectivity in the governing system, which I'll talk a little bit more later. You're also seeing different business models. You're seeing things like co-opetition, cooperatives. How do we solve these complex healthcare problems in new, unique, and different ways? And while things like collaboratives and co-opetition can be very powerful, they also present pretty significant governing challenges as well. So all those things, you put them in the mix, and it's harder and harder to be a good board and an effective director today.
Thank you. I love the particular phrase, how do we manage and master more complexity with less time? A real challenge. And in fact, Dottie, in her practice and her firm, has been helping boards deal with some of that challenge. How do you react to that general question? What do you see as the factors that are causing boards and executive teams to want more information, better information, more digestible information?
Thanks, Jim. And all I can tell you is going to just echo my colleagues here. Kelly and Bill are spot on. I mean, I think one thing that you can certainly say as you look across the landscape, certainly in healthcare, but not just in healthcare. We are in an interesting era. We're in this era of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. I mean, we are going to just have to learn to be able to be nimble and to pivot quickly in this kind of new normal that I think we're in. And certainly things that are going to be coming out of the federal American Health Care Act legislation. Of course, as soon as we all know what's in it, we can then sort of figure out what we need to do about it or do with it. But even above and beyond that, there are just a host of different kinds of pressures on boards that require them not only to get information faster, but to get the right information at the right moment. You kind of can't overemphasize the importance of that. I think sometimes, we think more is better, and that's not really necessarily so. There are far too many, I think, organizations that sort of paper their boards to death or just give them so much information that they really can't spot the critical issues, the things that are most important. It's hard to get those things to rise to the top. And Bill, I think, made a great point saying that you have to be able to have greater complexity with less available time and have that more easily. I think the other sort of aspect of that, and one of the things that we've been focused a lot here in our product development and in our conversations, is how do we also change the kind of information that boards receive? So certainly making it easier and faster and more secure for them to get the information they're already used to receiving. But how do we also think about what they know? What kind of information are they actually receiving? Is it a lengthy report that comes out once a month or once a quarter, or are they able to get something a bit more real time, maybe high level? Maybe it's not super granular, so they're stepping on management's toes, but something that allows them to spot trends and to do a little bit of digging and maybe be curious and ask some questions that help them to arrive at new insights. We really think that's the direction things need to head and are heading. And what's been very fascinating about this is, unlike sort of earlier days in this industry, we see this effort being led by directors themselves. Directors are clamoring for this. They're saying this is what they want and what they need. And partly, I think it's driven by their concern over ways that they might get in trouble. I think there's a lot of concern on the part of directors around areas of personal liability that they could run afoul of simply because they aren't aware of how a specific rule might play out in their day-to-day lives as they do their work. I think there's a great concern there. And maybe just to provide one quick example of that, lately there's been a lot of conversation around cybersecurity, partly fueled by what happened with the WannaCry virus. And for those that, kind of watched what was happening with that began actually in the healthcare sector in the UK. So it actually started with the National Health Service in London. And basically there was a phishing attempt that was successful. And so one executive opened this email that was bad, and it basically infiltrated the system and created this global, almost spread like a global pandemic virus. I mean, there's a reason why we call these things viruses, right? So WannaCry, within the first 72 hours had knocked out FedEx's ability to deliver packages. I mean, it was massive. And, when you think about healthcare in particular, boards are very concerned about this sort of thing because, A, they may not feel like they are necessarily the best informed and the best prepared to deal with those kinds of issues, but B, they look at their own systems and think, my gosh, we are kind of trying to manage some things on a shoestring. We don't really even know how secure our patient databases are, or the laptops that we see on the gurneys being wheeled through the hospital. Those might all be, running XP, which is riddled with security holes. So I think there's a lot of areas of concern for boards. It's not going to get easier. It's only going to get harder. And so I think boards are well advised to kind of start to step up their game a bit and embrace the tools that are out there to help them be smarter, better, faster.
Exploring some of these new tools in a moment, as our audience can appreciate from our three panelists so far, we see more complexity, the need for nimbleness and agility, that it's more data but better data, different kinds of data that are going to be necessary. And then all three are putting the fear of God in me about the risks involved, sub-compliance in compensation, cyber risk, HIPAA risks, the Department of Justice and the Office of Inspector General of Medicare, all looking over shoulders of boards to see how they're making decisions and the information they're using for decisions. So let's start going through our presentation here. Dottie, I'd like to come back to you and explain a little bit about how you're working with boards, how you listen to them, how you adapt some of your technologies, and what you're trying to do to give them the opportunity to mine information and to use it to their advantage for their strategic mission and purposes. Come to you, Dottie, and we have a few slides that you've shared.
And this is just basic. And obviously, Board Effect and Diligent and the other brands that are part of the Diligent company have kind of a similar theme, which is how do we help board directors and corporate secretaries and others that are involved in the governance process create, collate, deliver, and reflect and act on the information they need to do that job well. So everything from creating reports and delivering those to board members onto their tablets, their phones, their computers, everything from, putting together board self-assessment forms and allowing them to give feedback on their performance or on their colleagues' performance, other board members, everything from voting to just the routine scheduling of meetings, basically all of the operational stuff that goes into the operations of a board can be managed through this software and be handled in a way that it is searchable within the confines of the system, but totally secure, so that they don't have to be concerned that it's being reviewed or hacked or stolen by those that shouldn't have access. So that's really kind of at a 30,000-foot level what the software is designed to do. One thing I will say, as we continue to gain in our sophistication of understanding what would be of value to directors, we have begun to build other modules that we know add value, but also we feel, more than just compliance, more than just signing their work, help them to really do a different kind of job. So let me just give you one example. We recently did a survey with the New York Stock Exchange of publicly traded companies on the exchange to ask those directors about some of their board communication practices and what that might mean in terms of the director's level of personal risk around cybersecurity. And one of the findings that was pretty startling and a little bit scary was that 92% of the directors said that they use personal email accounts at least occasionally to conduct board business. So there's an example of something that's of concern, because we know that personal email accounts, most of them are not secured. And in particular, we know that about 34%, I think it is, or 33% use either Gmail, Yahoo Mail, or AOL. All three of those systems have, in fact, been hacked within the last 18 months. So what's difficult about that is you've got directors who have access to the most sensitive information using the least secure communication channels to talk to one another. So we start to develop other products like Messenger is a good example, where directors can have point-to-point communications. They can share documents with one another, but they can do that all within the confines of a totally closed loop, totally controlled by the corporate secretary, and totally secured environment. So if they need to archive that information and have it available in the case of a discovery process or litigation, or just for corporate records, especially if they're a public entity, like a public hospital, it makes it super easy to manage, but still gives them the opportunity to talk with one another securely.
Dottie, I have just a quick question.
Sure.
We see slide 4 here, it deals with Messenger that you mentioned. I'm intrigued with you have materials management on some of your slides. Come up with that concept of the materials that are being managed. What do you mean by that? How do boards use that in this information handling arena?
That's a great question. I mean, materials is a big, broad umbrella under which you could file everything from the bylaws to the core policy documents of the board to even the articles of incorporation to the charters for each one of the committees, to past agendas, past minutes, any other documents that need to be provided from a compliance perspective around the board activities, board rosters. All that is kind of under that big umbrella of material. So kind of all the stuff, all the documents, all the information that boards would have to read, assimilate, understand, and act upon. And so where this all comes out of is really, originally this all came out of the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation. There was suddenly kind of a groundswell of support from the point of directors to have systems and tools in place that help them to meet those new compliance requirements, particularly around audit committee requirements. But over time, as you go beyond public companies, that same feeling, that same need began to be expressed in other industries, especially in healthcare. And I think in healthcare in particular, once the Affordable Care Act came onto the scene and there were some new requirements regarding electronic health records, it just became a bit more obvious that maybe they should also think about securing and making electronic the board communications as well. It just made a lot of sense. It seems sort of obvious, actually. Okay, if we're going to take all of our patient records and all of our other communications throughout the hospital and make them digital, why on earth we still provide our board members with binders of paper. That just seemed weird, especially since they're the top leadership of the organization. We're going to give them the least tools? That makes no sense. So that's sort of where the industry began to grow. But again, I would say even though this industry is about 15 years old now, in many respects, we're still kind of in our infancy, and that's partly because the nature of how boards communicate is still somewhat in a very traditional mode. I mean, even if we are, making things digital, it doesn't yet mean that boards are getting different information. It just means that they're getting it in a different channel. So it's still a lengthy report that gets delivered once a month. It's happening digitally. I think where we're heading it as an industry, and I'll be interested to hear Bill's take on this too, because I know he's in the same mode, is how do we change what boards get to see and what they know? And that's going to be very interesting to see where we go.
To just see if you can make a couple of comments on the slide that is in front of the participants here. Secure technology, these are the kinds of information. You and I have talked a lot before. There are many board portal organizations, and I think you've got a good approach to it. Can you make some additional comments on this slide and the next before we go to Bill?
Sure. So basically, the system, again, it's all designed around the way boards and committees and the staff that support them do their work. So if you think about all those different kinds of activities, they fall into different cycles and different cadences, whether we're talking about just managing meetings, whether we're talking about, managing the work of the audit committee or the quality and safety committee, whether we're talking about some of the annual compliance activities that they have to engage in, and so on. So this is just a sampling of the kinds of things that this type of software is designed to address. So, everything from just consolidating all of those board documents into one package that can easily get delivered onto your phone or your tablet so that you don't have to lug around any sort of binders of paper, and also so that everything is completely secured. And should you lose a mobile device, it can be wiped clean without you having to go recover the device. So it's all very controlled. Also just making sure that whenever there are last-minute changes, which I think, quite frankly, is becoming the norm, and not so surprisingly because things change very frequently now, those last-minute updates really become quite simple. Everyone knows when they're looking in the system, they've got the most recent version because it's all digital. So there's not an issue of that version control and that confusion of, do I have, yesterday's email attachment or am I looking at today's email attachment? You just go to one secure channel and whatever you're seeing is the current version. So it just makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, some of the other things that I'll just call attention to, I won't go through all of these, but permission settings is becoming a very important component of this because different people need to access different information at different times. And so, for example, let's say that you're a public hospital, you may have a lot of information that you need to make available to the general public and disclose, agendas and minutes to the public so that they can participate actively in the meeting. But then you have closed session, and sometimes in closed session, there may still be materials that need to be provided. So having that ability to very granularly decide what exactly someone is going to see is very important. And obviously, software makes that pretty simple because you can just decide based on the user's credentials what access to, what they don't have access to. It just makes it very easy. Say that in terms of Diligence, this broader company that I'm part of, it is now by far the largest in this space, by about 5 times the size of the next largest player. And at this point, we're serving about 350,000 users. That number has actually gone up quite a bit. But our client retention rate is giant. So it's a 98% retention rate. Diligent as a company, every single year wins many awards for customer service. It's 24/7, 365 service on the phone. I have yet to call them and not have it pick up on the first ring. It's kind of amazing. So it's really very impressive. Global presence, over 9,000 clients in over 75 countries, 45% of the Fortune 1,000. So Diligent as a company has had a focus in financial services and corporate space for a long time. With the acquisition of BoardEffect, there is now also a larger presence in healthcare. So between the two companies, we have about a little more than 1,000 hospitals that we serve, mostly in the U.S., and other healthcare entities as well, including medical societies, medical boards, and other types of entities.
Dottie, I'll come back to you with another question in a moment. I was recently talking with a board member who loved he was provided an iPad and board books that would come delivered quickly days in advance of the meeting on the iPad. But now, after several months of using it, he's getting nervous that the executive team just finds it so easy they're dumping even more information in the iPad. So we'll come back to you later about how to sift this through, because sometimes technology is our friend and a tool, and sometimes it can be a challenge for us. So we think about that question, and we'll come back to that in a moment.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Bill, looking at the technology in a different perspective, Bill, some of the things that Dottie has shared, you like to mine data and display it in a way that helps board make better decisions and deal with some of their risks. So I'd like to share some of your additional thoughts with us.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, as mentioned before, the evolution of the governance space, in a lot of ways, many ways, we're in an increasingly data-driven world, and relevant and useful performance data drives behaviors and better decision-making. The systems themselves are no exception. And, much of what I'm going to say and much of what I've been doing for the last 9 years really comes out of my experience in corporate America, and particularly healthcare, but having sat in seats of Chief Risk Officer, Chief Ethics Officer, serving the board, being on the management team. So the slide that Jim has up right now, I'm going to give you 3 words, and I'm going to just touch on each of these 3 words. They really hit that point we made earlier about how do we manage and master greater complexity without spending more time. And the words are integrating, equipping, and sustaining. So let's each one of those things. I'm going to kind of speak to high level, this visual you have in front of you. The first thing we really need to start doing, again, if we're going to master this complexity without spending more time, we have to start looking at the governance system as a system. And actually the term governance means to steer or to navigate. And so if I'm out advising clients and organizations, I'm actually getting, because they don't always see they don't always see their big picture governing system, and they don't always look at it as the navigation system. It's how we take authority, use that authority to make decisions, so those decisions determine where we go. The first picture in the number 1 section there starts looking at the 3 dimensions of any good corporate governance system. You have a management team that's responsible to execute as part of their role in navigating. You have an oversight function that's typically some kind of board of directors or trustees that oversight. Then you have a monitoring or verification system. Think compliance, think audit, ethics. And we tend to look at these things somewhat separately and as subsystems that are just separate subsystems. And what do we know about navigation? When the vehicle that we're navigating becomes more complex and the environment within which you are navigating becomes higher risk, the navigation system needs to be more integrated. I like to use the example of a locomotive versus an aircraft. They're definitely flying aircrafts these days, even as small organizations. And have to really start looking at the navigation system as a more integrated whole. It is the only way. So it's not just how each of these dimensions operates themselves, it's how they operate together. Execution, oversight, and verification must work more effectively together. The information flow, the alignment, the communication systems have to be improved over what we today for many reasons that we've talked about already. I'm going to go on to the second word, equipping. The National Association of Corporate Directors recently came out with a blue ribbon commission on what they call building the strategic asset board. And a lot of, so it's really what we've been talking about. How do we move to that next level? How does the board maintain their position as a strategic asset in a growing complex world? I really believe this is much more about coaching and internal competency building versus some kind of executional dependency on an outside resource. We really must build these internal competencies around governance, and particularly right now around risk management. Touches every one of those 3 dimensions, but in a way that they have to operate more holistically together. So one of the real conclusions from this NACD study, one of their kind of recommendations, and I'll quote, what is really needed, what boards need today, is a set of tools and processes that works together as a system for continuous improvement. So the leading association for boards and directors is saying, we need thinking differently, we need to be thinking continuous improvement, and we need tools and processes and dashboards to help us get that done. And this word, sustain, again, really about this continuous improvement approach. And all we have here is just what we're developing over the last decade to help organizations look strategically, more holistically at their governing system and how to connect these subsystems more effectively together. Kind of on the healthcare line, we've developed what we call vital signs, which measures not only the health, each of those three dimensions, but very importantly, how they interact with each other, because they must do it more effectively. We need to look at capabilities. These are all areas where we can and provide a better insight into the governing system and use data and use better information to drive better behaviors and drive better decision making across that system. And then down on number 4, we're really using, and Dottie mentioned many of these things as well, some of the levers of today's world of technology and software as a service, expert content delivery, sharing of best practices, getting tools in the hands of people who are responsible for the governing system, using data analytics and benchmarking to drive behavior, and then networking people with each other as well, people that sit in different governing seats across that complex system. Again, this is all about how do we start integrating, equipping, and sustaining so that we can manage and master that complexity without spending more time, because that's just not an option. Last piece here, just a quick example of what a dashboard like that would look like. As we work with organizations to help them understand their vital signs and then continuously improve those vital signs, this kind of data, we must get to a place where the governing system and its quality is measurable. We have not had that in the past. We've had little pieces of measurement, but we haven't really been measuring the efficacy of the whole system as a whole, and we've actually developed an approach to do that. Those measurements must be actionable and they must be demonstrable. We're getting into a period now where outside entities, regulators, investors, rating agencies are going to demand more demonstrability of governance quality. And so the things that Dottie was talking about, the things that I'm talking about, are really going to become a necessity for today's organizations, especially in a complex industry like healthcare.
Thank you very much. Kelly, I've been asking you to think about what our guests sharing in terms of the need for new technologies, and they're starting to share with us some very impressive to harness information. As you think about our clients and the challenges, and you serve on some boards yourself, questions, and we're getting some questions in from the audience as well. We only have a few minutes left. Kelly, what are you seeing to be questions or issues that you'd like to pose to both Bill and to Dottie, and we'll get back to Dottie in a moment about information overload as well.
Sure. Well, I think the cybersecurity piece is one that really interests me, because with my focus on compliance and regulatory issues, the use of private emails in the boardroom and things like that really kind of hits home for me in terms of what would keep me up at night. And I'm wondering, what could lead to a lack of understanding of what some of those risks are, how some of these tools can help really reinforce the importance of security for boards, and in particular, as you've got folks participating who come from areas outside of healthcare, how do we use these tools to ensure that all of the PHI and the very sensitive information continues to be protected, and how do we ensure the board members understand that importance?
Good. Turn to Dottie and then to Bill on your question and observation, which I think is particularly useful, Kelly. Dottie, before we go into how to these tools be used, and Kelly's point that there's a lot of people coming aboard that have maybe as much expertise in health, but they're bringing expertise from other industries as well, which is itself a challenge. But Dottie, I'd ask you the question about information overload. How do you board portals help deal with that, and the executives deal with that? And similarly, Bill, I'm going to turn to you on how using your vital signs and dashboards be useful in that regard as well. First, Dottie, information overload, and then respond to the points that Kelly was making about the risk and how to mitigate it.
Sure. No, thank you. I'll keep it really brief because I know we're running close on time here, but just a couple of thoughts. I mean, in terms of the information overload piece, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot more of a human component there than a machine component right now, right? Because there is still a role for the corporate secretary, for the board chair, for the CEO, for other leaders within the healthcare system to, determine the information that is going to get presented to the board and then to make that information available to the board. And, and even if they're using really good, dashboard programs like the Bill's described, which I'm looking forward to having a call after this with Bill to learn more because I have lots of questions for him. It looks really cool. But, even there's going to be someone who's kind of making the decisions about what information goes in front of the board and how much information and at what time that information goes goes in front of the board. So I always like, talk with our corporate secretaries, we always like to sort of suggest to them to think of themselves as curators. Part of their role is really to curate the content in such a way that, the board is fully briefed on an issue, has the information at its disposal to become educated on that issue, understands what's at stake in a particular decision, but that they're not trying to lead the board to take a specific decision. That they're not, not trying to say, here's a slate of 3 options, pick one, and clearly option A is the best, but rather they're saying, hey, we know you have a tough decision to make. Here's what's at stake. Here's all the issues. Would you take this information and then come back to us and help us reframe how to make sense of this issue and how we should position it so that we can arrive at the best decision? I think if the staff and the board work together in that kind of a shared governance model and partnership, they really position the organization to be as nimble and as strong as possible. And certainly that requires some sensitivity and smarts in terms of what kind of information to deliver, the format in which that information gets delivered, and the timing. So that's something I'd say there. Now, clearly, the tools that Diligent makes available, the tools that Bill makes available, will help you do just that really efficiently and well. It's probably going to be very difficult to do it otherwise, but it's not magic, right? It's not going to magically tell the board what it needs to know, at least not yet. Although that may be coming. In terms of the cybersecurity piece, Kelly, there's a lot there to be concerned about. There's a lot to be worried about there. I would say the one piece of guidance that we've been giving to our directors is, to the extent that you are already doing this, great, give yourselves a pat on the back. But what we found is that very few boards are turning to their information security teams within their organizations and saying, could you help us understand how the ways that we communicate might be putting this organization at risk? They're not doing that. And so we asked a question about that. We said, who sanctions how your board communicates? In a survey that we did, and only 7% said it was the information security team, which is disappointing, quite frankly, because really that's their jobs, is to make sure that the data is secure, and they're not leveraging that talent that they have in-house. So we would strongly recommend take a look at that and make sure that your IT security folks have some line of sight to the board.
Bill, we're near the end of our time. I want to give you a chance to react to Kelly's question and also this intriguing point that Dottie's making. We need a human and a technology interface, which is, I think, you've been dealing with on your vital signs and some of your dashboards. Give answer some closing observations and encouragement of what you'd like boards doing better in this realm, Bill.
Thank you, and that's great. Yeah, I'd like to kind of address this information overload issue and maybe a couple other pieces, because really what we've been developing and now are bringing to organizations really does deal with the human side, what I'd call the human dynamic side of governance. And that's why I feel so strongly that that whole governing system must be strong, and the board needs to be able to rely on it. Again, the board's job is oversight. I think sometimes people expect of them that they know as much as management does. That is just not possible. The time they spend, and this is not their day job. They have an oversight responsibility. So the stronger that governing system is, now how many boards today have kind of read on whether they can trust the underlying risk management discipline that management is executing, and that the monitoring system is doing what it's supposed to be doing and bubbles up the information they need, so the board can spend less time understanding if they can trust the data, which is what a lot of this data overload's about. It's just, well, let's just give them everything, and more time about what good information and good insights mean to the company's mission, strategy, and risk profile. And that's really what a board's job is. And because the world has changed so dramatically and so quickly, this governance system of most companies is not up to the task of today's fast-paced, volume world that we're in, and that's why we need to step up that system, and the board needs to have high confidence that the thing that it's relying on, first of all, give me good integrated information so that we can spend less time deciphering this and more time helping management make good decisions and help set a good direction. Let the board do its oversight job. And that's what I see happening a lot. And I, really came home to me when I was doing a speaking engagement recently in a small community bank, $300-400 million in assets, was said their monthly board book is over 1,000 pages. And I'm going, something is wrong here. There is no way that community bank board can figure out what's what and get that kind of information. And it ends up impeding the board from doing what its responsibility is. So, I think Wells Fargo is a good example recently of what was that board being told and what were they being given. And clearly they weren't being given everything they should be. And there were some weaknesses down in that risk and monitoring system they did not know about. And I'm not exonerating them, but clearly they weren't being given all the information they needed to do their job.
Thank you, Bill. We're going to bring the webinar to a close. I'll let each of you say a closing comment. But the screen in front of us now is a program that has a variety of technology-enabled education resources for boards called Govern Well. We'd encourage folks to look at the website and see more information about those materials. But as we look forward to smarter governance as a tool to enhance the vitality of healthcare organizations, smart being stakeholder engaged, mission driven, accountability expected, resource mobilized, and transparency enabled. We hope that these kinds of webinars are going to be useful for folks. I'd turn to you, Kelly. We'll just do Kelly and then Bill and Dottie for a closing admonition for board members. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. All three of you stimulate our thinking. What closing observation, Kelly, would you like to share with the audience?
Say that I'm sure a lot of folks are thinking right now about the investment that some of these technologies can mean for the organization, and I would just encourage folks to look at it as a long-term approach where if you're able to better govern and therefore reduce your risk in many areas of and compliance risk, an investment is very well worth it in order to ensure that you're able to make the best decisions and therefore avoid some of the regulatory and compliance risks that can have very costly outcomes, as we've seen with some of the very large settlements that have occurred. So I'd encourage folks to look at the bigger picture and try to understand what makes sense for your organization from your fiduciary duties.
Thank you. Bigger picture, longer range views, be prepared to invest in technology and the human dimension that Dottie was talking about for better board work, which should create the conditions within which those that are delivering care, managing care, are likely to be successful. A closing observation from you, and then Bill, and then we'll wrap up this webinar.
Thanks so much, Jim. I would just say, to echo Kelly's sentiment, do your homework. It's worth it to take some time and kind of look out there to see what tools might be available. There are new things coming all the time, and it does not have to be so hard. And while a lot of these issues are scary, it doesn't have to be so scary. There are people and companies and tools that can help you. And so I would say it's worth it to take a little time to do some investigation and find out what's at your disposal.
Thanks, Dottie. And Bill, we'll end with you, a closing admonition or encouragement for board members.
Absolutely. So I'd like to just kind of maybe pull up and take a quick macro view here. And the idea of smart governance, I liked how you articulated that, Jim. That's so important. Why is it important that we as individual organizations, as an industry, move forward? And I think we're all in agreement we need to go to the next level. Is really the whole free enterprise system was built on self-governance and high trust. And as the world has changed and our governing systems have become, quite frankly, not making the grade in many respects because they need to go to the next level, that is why we have seen so much regulation. And so we've really got to start kind of taking control again of our enterprises in our industries. And some regulation is good, but over-regulation is very expensive, and I think just increases the complexity. So good self-governance is good for our country, and that's something I really believe in.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Kelly, Dottie, Bill, for stimulating our thinking, both as board members and executive teams, about information for better governance. Thank you all for participating in these 4 webinar series. We'll bring this series to a close. Watch for emails with the link to the recording of this webinar as well as the other 3. Thank you all for what you're doing to strengthen the governance of this nation's healthcare system. We're adjourned.